So each person's experience of trauma and reaction to trauma is going to be different. And there are some common effects that research shows us may be likely to happen after someone has experienced trauma. We know that trauma affects a person's thoughts, emotions, behaviors, relationships, spirituality, their physical experiences. All the parts of a person's life can be impacted with the experience of trauma. Some of the ways that trauma might impact a person's thoughts could be having uncertainty about their life's purpose. They might not have a sense of their own competency or resilience. Trauma can affect how they think of the rest of the world and how they view other people. It can affect a person's sense of safety. The world might seem inherently dangerous to someone after an experience of trauma. And a person's sense of fairness can also be affected if they feel like they will ever get a fair shot at anything. It's also very common for folks to have questions about the future. It might be really difficult to imagine a future. So some of the emotional impacts of trauma might be feeling too much or too little. Their emotional response might just seem out of proportion to what's happened in a given situation. Someone who's experienced trauma can have difficulty regulating emotions. They might feel agitated. They might express anger. Depression is a really common emotional response to trauma. A person might feel guilt about what's happened or have a feeling that they caused or contributed to it. The person might also have feelings of hopelessness and feelings of shame. In response to trauma, people often develop behaviors that serve to keep them safe in some way and to help them survive. So some of these behaviors that might show up in response to trauma could be aggression, could be self-harm, substance use, impulsivity, hypervigilance, which is always being on alert for potential threats around us, recklessness, especially in light of having difficulty imagining the future. It can be especially hard to engage in planning for the future or seeing a connection between one situation today and how that might affect things in the long term. Relationships and interactions with others can also be colored by the experience of trauma. So that might look like difficulty communicating with others. It could be distrust or mistrust. It could be a sense of betrayal from other people. It can also show up as withdrawal from relationships and interactions with others, or avoidance, not getting close to anyone else in the first place as a way of protecting oneself from getting hurt again. Dependence is another symptom that might result after trauma, or a decreased use of one's support systems or isolating from those around them. There can also be physical impacts of trauma. That might be somatic issues, and this is when bodily symptoms are expressing emotional distress. So it could be chronic pain or headaches or some other way that a physical symptom is showing up after an emotional trauma. Sleep disturbances are really common, as is hypertension or having nightmares or flashbacks about the traumatic experience. So part of trauma-informed care is really taking a non-judgmental approach and meeting the person where they are. Some of the trauma responses, if you're just observing them on the surface, might be hard to understand, or they could be easily misidentified as something else. So recognizing and being familiar with the effects of trauma is a key step in providing more effective care.